The desert heat shimmered like liquid fire across the barren landscape of Helmand Province, as Staff Sergeant Maria Santos adjusted her scope for the third time that morning. The 2nd Battalion, 3rd Marines, had been deployed to this god-forsaken stretch of Afghanistan for 6 weeks now, and every day brought new challenges that tested their resolve and brotherhood. Maria had earned her place as the battalion's premier sniper through years of dedication, countless hours on the range, and an unwavering commitment to protecting her fellow Marines. The mission briefing that morning had been straightforward, or so it seemed. Intelligence reports indicated a small Taliban cell operating from a compound roughly 12 kilometers northeast of their forward operating base. The plan called for a standard sweep and clear operation, with Maria and her spotter, Corporal Jake Williams, providing overwatch from a ridgeline approximately 800 meters from the target location. Command expected minimal resistance, perhaps a handful of insurgents at most. As the convoy of Humvees kicked up clouds of dust on their way to the objective, Maria couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had been gnawing at her since dawn. Her instincts, honed through 3 combat deployments, rarely led her astray. The intelligence felt too clean, too convenient. In her experience, operations that seemed simple rarely stayed that way for long. The terrain surrounding the target compound was a tactical nightmare. Rocky outcroppings and deep ravines created natural choke points and ambush sites. The single dirt road leading to the objective snaked through a series of narrow defiles that would funnel the Marines into predictable killing zones. Maria had voiced her concerns during the briefing, suggesting alternative routes and additional reconnaissance, but time constraints and pressure from higher command had overruled her recommendations. Captain Rodriguez, the company commander, was a good officer who trusted his Marines and valued their input. However, the pressure from battalion headquarters to show results had been mounting steadily over the past month. Several previous operations had yielded minimal intelligence and no significant captures, leading to questions about the unit's effectiveness from division command. This mission represented an opportunity to demonstrate the battalion's capabilities and justify their continued presence in this sector. As Maria settled into her hide site on the rocky ridge, she methodically checked her equipment. Her M40A5 sniper rifle was pristine, cleaned, and maintained with the religious dedication that all snipers brought to their craft. The Schmidt and Bender scope was perfectly zeroed, and she had memorized every detail of the terrain spread out below her. Jake, her spotter, was equally prepared with his spotting scope and range-finding equipment. Together, they formed a lethal team that had saved countless Marines' lives over the previous months. The first sign that something was wrong came at exactly 0847 hours. Maria watched through her scope as the lead Humvee rounded a bend in the road and suddenly stopped. Through her radio, she heard the tense voice of Sergeant First Class Thompson reporting suspicious activity near the compound. What intelligence had described as a small, isolated building was actually part of a larger complex, partially hidden by camouflage netting and natural terrain features. Maria immediately began scanning the surrounding area with her rifle scope, while Jake worked with his spotting scope to identify potential threats. What they discovered made her blood run cold. The hillsides on both sides of the road were dotted with carefully concealed fighting positions. Muzzle flashes began appearing from multiple locations as Taliban fighters opened fire on the exposed Marines below. This wasn't a simple compound sweep. It was a carefully orchestrated ambush, with the American forces walking directly into a trap. The radio crackled with urgent communications as the convoy found itself pinned down in the kill zone. Rocket-propelled grenades began exploding around the vehicles, and automatic weapons fire poured down from elevated positions on both sides of the valley. The Marines were trapped in a narrow defile with steep walls on either side, unable to maneuver effectively or establish proper defensive positions. Captain Rodriguez's voice came over the radio, calm despite the chaos erupting around his men. He was calling for immediate air support and requesting permission to withdraw from the kill zone. The response from battalion command was swift and uncompromising. Maintain position and complete the mission. Air support was unavailable due to operations in other sectors, and withdrawal was not authorized without achieving the primary objective. Maria felt her frustration mounting as she watched her fellow Marines fighting for their lives below. Her elevated position gave her an excellent view of the entire battlefield, and she could see threats that the men in the valley couldn't possibly detect. Taliban fighters were moving through covered positions, attempting to flank the American forces and cut off any potential escape routes. If something didn't change quickly, the entire company would be overwhelmed. The standard rules of engagement were clear and inflexible. Snipers were to engage only designated targets as directed by their chain of command. Unauthorized engagement could result in civilian casualties, international incidents, or compromise of ongoing operations. These protocols existed for good reasons, hammered into every Marine through countless hours of training and reinforced through strict adherence in combat situations. But protocols were written by men in air-conditioned offices who had never watched their brothers dying in the dust, while bureaucrats debated the finer points of engagement criteria. Maria could see Taliban fighters moving into positions that would allow them to devastate the trapped Marines with enfilading fire. She could prevent it, but only by disobeying direct orders and violating established procedures. Jake sensed her internal struggle and leaned closer to whisper urgently in her ear. The spotter had been with Maria through dozens of firefights and understood her better than anyone else in the battalion. He knew she was weighing the consequences of action against the cost of inaction, measuring her career against the lives of 620 Marines who were counting on her to keep them alive. The decision that would define the rest of Maria Santos's military career was approaching rapidly, and the weight of responsibility pressed down on her shoulders like a physical force. The moment of decision arrived when Maria spotted a Taliban machine gun team setting up in a concealed position that would give them a devastating field of fire across the entire American formation. The enemy fighters were methodically positioning their weapon, completely unaware that they were being observed from the distant ridgeline. In less than 30 seconds, they would be ready to open fire, and the results would be catastrophic for the Marines trapped below. Maria's training warred with her conscience as she placed her crosshairs on the machine gunner's center mass. Every fiber of her being as a Marine demanded that she protect her fellow warriors. But years of military discipline held her finger frozen on the trigger guard. The radio remained silent from battalion command, offering no guidance or authorization for engagement. Standard protocol required her to request permission before engaging targets. But the communication delay would doom the Marines who were counting on her. Without warning, Jake's voice cut through her internal debate with a harsh whisper that carried the weight of absolute certainty. He had been calculating ranges and wind conditions, preparing for the engagement that he knew was inevitable. His spotting scope had identified not just the machine gun team, but an entire network of Taliban positions that were invisible to the Marines in the valley below. The tactical situation was far worse than anyone at battalion headquarters could possibly understand from their remote location. Maria made her choice in a heartbeat that seemed to stretch for eternity. Her finger moved to the trigger as she centered her reticle on the machine gunner's vital zone. The M40A-5 bucked against her shoulder with familiar recoil as the bullet crossed 800 meters in less than a second. Through her scope, she watched the Taliban fighter collapse behind his weapon, eliminating the immediate threat to her fellow Marines. The shot that saved 620 lives also ended Maria Santos's military career, though she wouldn't understand the full consequences for several more hours. Breaking radio protocol, she immediately began engaging additional targets without authorization, systematically dismantling the Taliban ambush from her concealed position on the ridge. Jake fed her target information and range calculations as they worked together to neutralize the greatest threats to the Marines below. Her second shot took out a Taliban spotter who was directing mortar fire onto the American positions. The third eliminated a sniper who had been targeting Marine squad leaders with devastating effectiveness. Each shot was carefully calculated and precisely placed, demonstrating the lethal efficiency that had made Maria one of the most respected snipers in the entire Marine Corps. The Taliban fighters, suddenly finding their concealed positions compromised by an unseen enemy, began to withdraw from their carefully prepared ambush sites. The immediate effect on the battlefield was dramatic and undeniable. With the machine gun silenced and key enemy personnel eliminated, the Marines in the valley were able to establish effective defensive positions and begin coordinating a fighting withdrawal. Captain Rodriguez's voice over the radio reflected a mixture of relief and professional admiration as his company regained tactical initiative and began extracting from the kill zone. But Maria's unauthorized engagement had been monitored by military communication systems that recorded every radio transmission and tracked every shot fired during combat operations. Within minutes of her first trigger pull, questions were being raised at battalion headquarters about the sniper team's actions. The fact that she had engaged without proper authorization was creating a bureaucratic firestorm that would eventually consume her career. The tactical success of her intervention became immediately apparent as Marine casualties dropped to zero, despite the intensity of the ongoing firefight. The Taliban ambush, which had been designed to inflict maximum casualties on the American force, was systematically dismantled by Maria's precise shooting and Jake's expert spotting. Enemy fighters who had spent weeks preparing concealed positions found themselves exposed and vulnerable to accurate sniper fire. As the Marines successfully withdrew from the kill zone, Maria continued to provide overwatch and eliminate threats as they appeared. Her shooting was nothing short of spectacular, with each bullet finding its intended target despite challenging environmental conditions. The wind was gusting unpredictably through the mountain passes, and the heat shimmer was making target acquisition difficult, but her years of training and natural ability allowed her to adapt and maintain devastating accuracy. Jake's role as spotter was equally crucial to their success. He identified targets, calculated environmental factors, and provided the real-time intelligence that allowed Maria to engage effectively. Together, they had turned what should have been a catastrophic defeat into a tactical victory, but their success came at a price that neither fully understood during the heat of battle. The radio traffic from battalion headquarters grew increasingly urgent as senior officers demanded explanations for the unauthorized engagement. Military doctrine is built on strict adherence to established procedures, and Maria's decision to ignore protocol had created a command crisis that extended far beyond the immediate tactical situation. While her actions had undoubtedly saved lives, they had also violated fundamental principles of military discipline and chain of command authority. Colonel Patterson, the battalion commander, found himself in an impossible position as reports filtered back from the field. The tactical success was undeniable, but the breach of protocol could not be overlooked without undermining the entire command structure. Military justice requires consistency and impartiality, regardless of outcomes or intentions. Even actions that save lives must be evaluated according to established standards if military discipline is to be maintained. The extraction phase of the operation proceeded smoothly thanks to Maria's continued overwatch. She eliminated several Taliban fighters who attempted to pursue the withdrawing Marines, ensuring that the company could reach safe terrain without additional casualties. Her ammunition expenditure was carefully controlled, with each shot serving a specific tactical purpose, rather than simply suppressing enemy movement. As the last Marine vehicle cleared the danger area, Maria finally allowed herself to relax slightly behind her rifle. The immediate threat had been neutralized, and her fellow Marines were safe. However, the radio traffic she was monitoring made it clear that her troubles were just beginning. Questions about her actions were multiplying rapidly, and the tone of communications from higher command suggested that serious consequences were inevitable. Jake attempted to reassure her that their actions had been necessary and justified, but Maria understood military politics well enough to know that justification wouldn't necessarily protect her from the bureaucratic consequences of her decision. She had made a choice to prioritize lives over regulations, and now she would face whatever punishment the system deemed appropriate for her breach of protocol. The debriefing session that followed the operation was unlike anything Maria had experienced in her military career. She sat across from Colonel Patterson and a panel of senior officers in a sterile conference room at the forward operating base, knowing that her future hung in the balance. The successful extraction of all 620 Marines should have been cause for celebration, but instead, the focus remained fixed on her violation of established protocols and chain of command authority. Colonel Patterson opened the session by acknowledging the tactical success of the operation, while making it clear that success could not excuse violations of military discipline. The Marine Corps functioned on a foundation of absolute adherence to lawful orders and established procedures. Without this discipline, the entire command structure would collapse into chaos, regardless of individual intentions or outcomes. Maria understood this principle intellectually, but understanding didn't make the situation any less frustrating. The investigation that followed was thorough and professional, examining every aspect of the engagement from multiple perspectives. Radio communications were analyzed, ballistic evidence was collected, and testimony was taken from every Marine who had participated in the operation. The objective facts were indisputable. Maria had engaged enemy targets without proper authorization, directly violating established rules of engagement and chain-of-command procedures. Captain Rodriguez testified on Maria's behalf, emphasizing the dire tactical situation and the immediate threat to his company. His testimony painted a vivid picture of Marines trapped in a kill zone with no available options for escape or reinforcement. Without Maria's intervention, he stated with absolute certainty, casualties would have been catastrophic. The captain's words carried significant weight, but they couldn't change the fundamental question of military discipline and adherence to orders. Jake Williams also testified about the tactical situation and the split-second decision that had led to their unauthorized engagement. As Maria's spotter, he had been an active participant in the violation of protocol, but his testimony focused on the immediate threats they had observed and the impossible position they had faced. His spotting scope recordings provided visual evidence of the Taliban positions that had been invisible to the Marines in the valley below. The testimonies of the Marines who had been saved by Maria's actions created a complex emotional dynamic within the investigation. Sergeant Thompson spoke about watching his squad pinned down by machine gun fire that suddenly ceased, allowing them to reach cover and survive. Corporal Martinez described seeing Taliban snipers fall before they could complete their targeting of Marine leaders. The gratitude in their voices was unmistakable, but gratitude couldn't override military law and procedure. As the investigation progressed, a deeper examination of the intelligence failure that had led to the ambush began to emerge. The Taliban had clearly known about the planned operation and had prepared accordingly, suggesting either compromised communications or inadequate reconnaissance. The intelligence reports that had described a small, lightly defended compound were so inaccurate as to suggest either incompetence or deliberate misinformation from local sources. Colonel Patterson found himself facing pressure from multiple directions as the investigation continued. Division headquarters demanded accountability for the protocol violations, while simultaneously seeking to understand how such flawed intelligence had led to the near disaster. The successful outcome of the operation, achieved entirely through the unauthorized actions of a single sniper team, raised uncomfortable questions about command decision-making and operational planning. The media attention that eventually surrounded the case added another layer of complexity to an already difficult situation. News of the female Marine sniper who had saved 620 lives by disobeying orders captured public imagination and created political pressure that extended far beyond military circles. The story resonated with civilians who saw Maria as a hero willing to risk everything for her fellow service members, but military leaders understood the dangerous precedent that would be set by overlooking her violations. 3 weeks after the operation, Colonel Patterson announced his decision regarding Maria's case. The evidence was clear that she had violated direct orders and established protocols, actions that normally would result in court-martial proceedings and potential imprisonment. However, the extraordinary circumstances of the tactical situation and the undeniable fact that her actions had saved hundreds of lives created a unique situation that required a more nuanced response. Rather than face court-martial, Maria was offered a choice that would allow her to maintain some dignity while acknowledging the seriousness of her violations. She could accept a non-judicial punishment that would include reduction in rank and administrative separation from the Marine Corps, or she could insist on her right to a court-martial and risk more severe consequences. The choice was difficult, but ultimately clear. Accept responsibility for her actions while maintaining her honor as a Marine. The ceremony marking Maria's departure from the Marine Corps was attended by every member of the battalion who could possibly be present. Colonel Patterson spoke about the impossible choices that combat sometimes requires and the courage necessary to make decisions when lives hang in the balance. While he could not officially condone her violations of protocol, his respect for her as a Marine and a warrior was evident in every word he spoke. Maria's final address to the battalion was brief but powerful. She spoke about the brotherhood that defined Marine culture and the responsibility every Marine bore for protecting their fellow warriors. Her decision to engage without authorization had been driven by that responsibility, and she accepted the consequences without regret or bitterness. The applause that followed her words continued for several minutes, a spontaneous expression of respect from Marines who understood the choice she had made. The aftermath of Maria's case led to significant changes in tactical protocols and rules of engagement for sniper teams operating in similar situations. Military planners recognized that the rigid communication requirements that had prevented her from engaging immediately could prove fatal in rapidly developing tactical situations. New procedures were implemented that gave greater autonomy to sniper teams while maintaining appropriate oversight and accountability. Jake Williams continued serving as a sniper with the battalion, carrying forward the lessons learned from that day in the Afghan mountains. He never forgot the courage Maria had shown in making an impossible choice, and he shared her story with younger Marines who needed to understand the weight of responsibility that came with their specialized training and capabilities. Years later, military historians would study the operation as an example of the complex moral and tactical challenges faced by modern warriors. Maria Santos had been forced to choose between obedience and conscience, between protocol and lives, between her career and her duty as she understood it. Her choice saved 620 Marines but cost her everything she had worked to achieve in her military career. It was a choice that defined not only her character but also the character of the Marine Corps that had trained her to make such impossible decisions when circumstances demanded nothing less than perfection under pressure.